Web3 world has gotten big. Look at this. We're in person. It's excellent.
I'm truly honored to be joined here by Eric Schmidt, one of the people that has formed how the web has evolved and how our society uses the internet today. So very grateful to Eric for coming here to speak with us. Thank you very much for sharing your views and being part of helping us see how to make Web3 a bigger part of society. Thank you. I'm going to just kind of jump right into it to make sure we can make the most of our time together with you. You've seen a lot of things. You've seen how the world has evolved, and so I think you have a very astute view of patterns and how the world changes. What I really want to understand is how did you come to the idea that Web3 is attractive? What attracts you to Web3? What is the fundamental value that you see being provided by Web3?
Well, it's important to tell the truth, and I'm historically a skeptic. And I'm a skeptic because although I like the beliefs and the values and the technology, I think the marketing got a little ahead of reality, which is okay. It's not the first, in the waves I've been in, this has happened every time. And let's start with the basic principles that Web3 and the work that you're doing is essentially trustless, immutable, and distributed. And those principles are really powerful for computer systems. That's why many of you got involved. And I looked at it and I thought, I don't think this thing's going to scale. I frankly just don't think it'll become big enough. And then you and a couple of other people started talking to me, and I think you were one of the inventors of this, about this basically really crazy idea. Sorry, it's your idea.
It's fine. I'm crazy. I'm on board with it.
I think it's established. And so layer one I understood, but the concept of layer two, where you use tokens to incentivize behavior, was a really powerful development in the last, say, 3 years, 4 years, roughly when you started. And that changes the economics in some really fundamental ways. And I think this is a case where you all, people in the audience, are ahead of the academics, the economists who understand this. And a simple way to understand this is that, so you and I do, this is not going to happen because you're busy doing this company, you and I do a new company, and we decide to have a new coin. And the coin is initially relatively worthless. Maybe I'll seed it with some money. And its value increases directly with demand. Now, in my whole career, I have always had compensation tied to stock options, which was tied to corporate wealth and so forth. But the token, the fact that the token goes up in value based on network effects, is a real discovery. And I don't think people understand quite the economics of this. I was talking to one founder who curiously wouldn't tell me his actual name. He had a code name. God knows why. And you never know. And I said, well, how do we do, I'm used to investing things, and you get so much, and I get so much. How much do you want? And he said, oh, we already know the answer. And I said, well, how much do I get? And he said, 20% of the tokens. And I said, good. How much do you get? 18% of the tokens. What goes to everyone else? He said, well, we need 30% of the tokens to stake the necessary network, to get the network working, get the validators on. We need about 100 validators. You've heard this speech before. Many of your chains operate this. And I said, I'm used to negotiating this. And he goes, I said, how do you know this? He goes, oh, there's a paper. This has been thoroughly studied. And he sends me the paper, right? So this economic structure is actually much more interesting than you all appreciate. It's a new way of tying compensation and incentives to network scale. That's a big deal.
Agree. I think it is a very big deal, and I think you're definitely getting to the core of the matter on that one. So how do you see?
But take some credit. This is actually like a big.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Come on. Oh, come on.
I take a credit in a decade or two when when everything's running on Web3. Then we'll, until then, I'm going to
Was that, did I hear a forecast? Okay, so let me just continue.
Very good at this.
Let me just continue. So first you have the layer ones, then you have the various layer twos, and the layer two provides all the necessary services. And now you have a problem of cross-chain, right, which is something Chainlink works on pretty well. And you have all of the problems of centralized systems in a distributed context because of this new invention. So the way I approach this, just to really answer your question, is I say I've got these layer one systems, I've got layer two systems, and how am I going to build a real scalable business? Today, we're not there. And we're not there because, frankly, and I hope most of you know this, most of the services that you use, which I think are Web3, are really hosted on Web2 cloud services. So an article I was reading, I assume it's true, you never know, is that 2/3 of the Ethereum computations are done on the 3 cloud providers, including the one that I like the most, Google. That's not decentralization. I talked to another person who said, be careful about real decentralization. You want to understand where the control points are. And even the current decentralized systems have ways in which they are centralized. For a while, before China banned it, 51% of all the miners were 3 companies in China. And as you know, with Bitcoin and the protocol, they can basically take over the whole protocol with that level of concentration. Today, that's not true, but you get the point.
I do. I really do.
This is what you're working on.
Well, yeah, this is, yeah, I would say that Chainlink Oracle networks create large committees of identified nodes where you can choose the decentralization that you want to achieve without having dynamic membership that creates 3 or 4 pools under the control of one mining pool operator. Yeah, I would say in that sense, yes, if you want a network of 100 nodes to do a very specific computation for you, you can choose the 100 nodes, you can choose the jurisdiction they're in, you can choose the trust assumptions you want to have with them, you can choose their commitment to you, and you know, those are all choices you should be able to make and to create that type of decentralization in a very explicit way rather than a dynamic membership way that creates these large mining pools.
Yeah, and my overall point is I think that you've just described a whole new industrial system that's not very well understood outside of this room.
Once again, very much in agreement with you. Kind of uncanny how you're getting to the core of the issue, having that you've arrived very recently, but it's really quite, I mean, recently to the conference, not like to the industry. But
recently to the industry too.
Okay, well then it's very impressive and it's amazing. I mean, the guy's getting to the core of the issue and like.
So what are you going to do? What are you going to do to fix it?
Well, I actually see more and more computation moving into Oracle networks because blockchains don't fulfill the scalability or privacy properties. And if they fulfill those properties, then that's fine. That computation can go there. But I think there'll be an interim stage where they won't fulfill those requirements. And so there needs to be a bridge, just like blockchains couldn't fulfill the requirement of providing data. You know, there are all these requirements that you have to build more advanced applications to really realize Web3. And all those requirements are really what Oracle networks seek to fulfill. Some of them will fall away and go into, you know, a blockchain, but many of them won't. It's just not very easy to predict which requirements will fall away and which won't. But we're building a pretty flexible system that, as you can tell, provides data, identity, you know, randomness, cross-chain soon, all these things. So, I mean, that's my plan to solve it, is to basically plug all the holes, and then the holes that are left are probably very valuable holes to keep filled. And that's where I think the value will land in that decade, half-decade time series.
So in the spirit of full disclosure, I'm the chairman of a woman named Michelle Ritter founded a company called Steel Perlot, of which I'm now the chairman, and she's the CEO. And she designed a structure where you do fundraising for funds that generate cash that goes into startups, and the startups are going to go into global financial systems based on these principles. So I decided to put my money and other people's money, you know, into this space. I think that your vision is correct. I'm a little bit more skeptical. I keep reading all of these claims that Web3 is going to take down Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and so forth, having lived through that, I think that's pretty unlikely. And I think what you're going to ultimately see, and I want to be very clear, is you're going to see, let's use the generic term Web 2, Web 3, you're going to see Web 2 used in cases where you don't need the trustlessness, but you can get the decentralization through centralization, and centralization of power, which is how those companies work. And so I think the more likely scenario is you're going to see the traditional Web 2 stuff, but if you need something which is trustless, decentralized, right, and immutable, you're going to have very, very powerful systems. If you look at zero-knowledge proofs and the development of that, which is it's been under development for a very long time, that will enable a completely new way in which you validate financial transactions. And part of the Chainlink vision is basically cryptographic truth is always the right answer. So your religion, if I can say it, is don't trust the human, trust the protocol, right? So roughly what way to say it. Well, that is a scalable model if you can get the technology to scale. And that's likely a major contribution to the computer architecture going forward.
Yeah, I think so. I think at the end of the day, people's faith in mathematics is going to end up being stronger than their faith in institutions and brands and other people, because the tendency that mathematical guarantees will have to fail them will be an extremely low percentage, whereas the tendency that humans and institutions and brands run by humans, those things will continue to, unfortunately, very unfortunately, they will continue to fail. And there'll be periods where they fail very little, and there'll be periods where they fail in, very rapid succession in big ways, like in the 2008 financial crisis. And, I would rather be building a system that's going to reconstruct the world in a reliable, guaranteed way than contributing to that. Yeah.
The other thing that you have is you have an opportunity, in addition to, so one way to think about what you're doing in Web3 is you're trying to recreate all the practices that exist in current cloud services, but in a decentralized platform. That's one way to think about your strategy. Mm-hmm. And to me, the most interesting question are what are the new services that are not easily done today in cloud? I mean, there's a straightforward list in cloud, right? Because the cloud stuff just replaced the stuff I used to do before cloud existed, right? So it's file services, scheduling invocation, figuring out how to run services and so forth and so on. There will eventually be some sort of Ethereum, zero-knowledge virtual machine. Today, the smart contracts are pretty, let me just say, poor in their capabilities. And that functionality should get there because of all the research that's being done in the industry. To me, the question is, what can you then do that you can't do today? And one of the most obvious things is doing distributed analytics over these kinds of decentralized systems. Because when you talk to the banks, they roughly, in some cases, know what's going on in their own banking system, but they have no idea what the other ones. And when you talk to the banking regulators, they have no visibility into anything. So imagine a system where you have extremely good analytics that are cross-chain, and these bankers can actually say, holy crap, we're just about to have a crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is basically the world that we all want to be in, because the cyclical booms and busts that just keep getting bigger and bigger are basically based on people not having access to siloed information. Let's forget even about regulators. It's even the credit rating agencies and all these people that are supposed to be experts and supposed to get access to the siloed information. I mean, that's the fundamental reason for most of these big cyclical boom and busts in developed markets.
Yeah, well, we've also talked about where would AI approach, and I've mostly been working on AI stuff. Once you have the data, just think of the generative design, the sort of analytics, and we can talk about this if you're interested in it, but the eventual vision is a new set of apps that allow you to manage the system better. We were struck with, in 2008, 2009, that there were no uncorrelated assets, right? Well, that's something that should be easily discoverable, right, by your own technology running on the top of the things that you're building.
Yeah, makes sense. I personally don't know exactly how AI is going to interact with blockchains. My view on it is skeptical, as you put it. I actually think that I've watched a bunch of these sci-fi shows, like Westworld and all these things. I don't really think it's going to be that bad, frankly. But I think that private keys, the interesting thing about the Westworld show was actually that the whole show is about getting access to a private key that gives access to like this other system. So basically, even if you have AI, maybe you still have encryption as a limiting factor. And then guess what system does really complex programmatic encryption? All right, it's blockchains, right? So maybe that can be a kind of good guardrail or good limitation to whatever fears people have about AI, is they can institute certain private key measures that can't be surpassed. So I have that skeptical view on that side.
I think that's a fine belief system. We'll see if that actually happens. I think the most important thing to know is that you're going to be able to do computations on the equivalent of blockchains layer 1, layer 2, using homomorphic encryption and zero knowledge proofs. So you will be able to analyze these things without necessarily getting into trouble.
Absolutely. I can't wait till they make that efficient. That's going to be a big deal, very big deal. Absolutely.
Well, look, we made some progress with the shift from proof of work to proof of stake. So that's a long time coming and incredibly important. And I think these changes are really good signs that your industry is getting its act together from the standpoint of computer science, right? Because computer scientists have known about these limitations for a very long time, and we've all complained about them. Well, some people have actually worked hard to get those things fixed.
So how do you see Web 2 systems interacting with Web 3 systems? Are Web 2 systems the trusted interfaces, and Web 3 systems are the trustless state storage and transactional backends? How does Web 2 interface with Web 3 in the long term?
Well, let me give you another example. Let's assume for purposes of argument that you're going to use the Web3 system through Android and iPhone. And by the way, it's in that order, not the other way. Is the phone itself a Web2 system? And I think it is, because it has traditional authentication, traditional computation, traditional rules about access to apps, and so forth. So I could imagine a competitor to those two emerging, on bare hardware or other kinds of devices. But that barrier is a pretty high barrier. You have to really do something exceptional to replace the functionality of those two now very, very mature platforms. I went through the PC versus Mac basically fight, and then I did Android versus iPhone. I was conveniently on the board of both companies at the time. And these are the fights that define a generation of technology. So it's going to be hard to displace. So that's the first question. So assuming you can get through the stores, the app stores, and figure out some way to do that, either with a simple app that then goes into some other protocol service that's delivered to your phone without an intermediary, then I think you've got some possibilities. But I think for most consumer apps, the consumer is going to be going through what we would describe as a Web 2 interface, and Web 3 is essentially the service that is behind them. And remember that as excited as you are about the complexity of your product, the consumer actually just wants it to work. And they want it to work without any input. They want it to know. They want it to be immediate, and they want it to be, boom, 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 done. And if you think about just using digital cash as a vision, think about all the obstacles to using digital cash right now. You have to physically move a credit card. You have to physically open your phone, all that kind of stuff. This is in the Web 2 world. The goal would be to make digital cash, broadly speaking, completely seamless, right? And that's a reasonable goal for the next 5 to 10 years. And it's clearly coming. And the regulators will, just as a minute on regulators, you don't want, so be careful, for those of you who've not dealt with regulators, don't ask for regulation early, please. I've done this now for 45 years. No, 47. Sorry, I was doing a little math. You don't want premature regulation. You want these systems to get built so people can understand what the really hard problems are, and then you want to figure out what problems they cause. Now, right now, it's important to understand that many of you would prefer not to have any regulation at all. Welcome to being a libertarian. And societies don't reward libertarian thinking very much because of all the issues around power and control and so forth and so on. It's highly unlikely that a purely libertarian view of how these things are going to emerge is going to work. What instead is going to happen is governments will assert their authority, partly because that's what they do, and you want to do it in such a way that it's rational. And today, for example, in the United States, it's not at all clear who the regulatory bodies are going to be, right? They're still thinking about it. They're still talking about it. Is it an asset that is regulated by the CFTC? How do we deal with AML, KYC issues, and so forth? And these are real issues. But my overall message is, for those of you that are working with regulators, take it slow, right? Get the regulation right. And it's very, very hard to get the regulation right in such that it prevents the bad things but allows all of the good things. It's really a difficult knife edge to be on.
Makes perfect sense.
And I have lived this. I have done this for the last 30 years, and I'm like, I don't want to have to do this again in Web3. So you do it.
I'm going to knock on something wooden. Someone else can live through it. I'm just going to build all this stuff. People are going to build cool things. That's our plan.
Yeah, and likely story.
Yeah, we don't make financial products. We don't do any of that.
But understand that you're successful enough that you're on somebody's list.
I understand. So, in your thank you so much. In your experience, in the way that the Web2 infrastructure evolved, right, where it evolved from larger closed systems to smaller and smaller pieces being combined as service-oriented architecture and then microservices. Do you see a similar dynamic happening from the point of view of Web3, and that it'll end up becoming smaller and smaller pieces that get composed into those more complex Web2 applications? And by the way, on the point on Web2 and Web3, I personally don't think it matters if the user relationships are retained by a lot of Web2 applications necessarily, because the fundamental value will flow through those interfaces into Web3 backend systems.
Okay. I agree with you in an optimistic scenario. Mm-hmm. It's perfectly possible that the Web2 companies will decide that you're having too much fun and making too much money, and that they will actually put in regulations, right, of their own. Right, so it's trickier than it sounds. So a note of caution on Web2, and by the way, when we were doing this, we didn't call it Web2, we just called it the web. What happened, let's see if I can describe it. We all started with a notion of true decentralization, true empowerment of individuals. All of the things that I did 25 years ago involving Mosaic and the internet and HTML and all this kind of stuff was presumed of the fact that the world would become disaggregated, that everyone would have equal access, all the stuff, all that religion stuff. And we believed it, and I really believed it. And if you look at the structure today of what you think of as Web 2, it's highly concentrated around relatively proprietary systems. And that's not what we started off in. So if you look at it in the arc of my career over 20 years, the same thing could happen to you. And you go, oh my God, that would be terrible. But let me tell you how it might happen. This is not a prediction. There are economic benefits and returns to scale. And you have really clever entrepreneurs who are very, very smart. They're moving quickly. They create value, and they can begin to merge and acquire things, right? And there are also technical benefits to centralization. Because of the Sybil effect, the truly distributed systems spend the vast majority, estimates are up to 90% of their time, making sure there isn't an interloper in the protocol, right? So and there are technical solutions to that. So you've got a system where it spends an awful lot of time making sure there aren't other people around. It's perfectly possible that that could lead to a small number of high-end, large players. So I don't think Web3 is immune from the kind of centralization that surprised me. Now, I was also one of the people who caused it, so I'm not trying to mislead you. But the economic incentives, the scale incentives, and the technology incentive itself tend to favor centralization. So one thing for you all to do is to make a map of what you think of Web3 will be, and then figure out which points will be centralized, which points will be regulated, and which ones will be wide open. The history of technology is they start completely wide open, and then there are centralizers, there are consolidators. There is probably a set of consolidators that will get either built, founded, or will come into the space and provide that to some of the infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand what you're saying in terms of economies of scale and efficiency, and I think back to your earlier point of mining pools, that that's an example of the efficiency of a mining pool attracting a lot of hash power into a single entity that's then probably through some backroom social convention kept at 25% or something. But I really think that the difference in Web3 is that it's about creating open markets for those compute workloads, for all of that, right? So the success of a protocol for me isn't that it centralizes the value of the compute or the control in one group, like a mining pool. It's that it successfully creates a market where people efficiently bid against each other to create more efficiency, more security, often through some form of formalized reputation. So I think the real difference is that, yes, those big companies could get better deals on hardware, better deals on data centers, better deals on cooling, better deals on human capital, better deals on a bunch of things. But I think the real question is that if you make a market, how does that market evolve when all you need is very proven inputs, very proven uptime? And that's what I think Web3 reputation systems really do. There's actually a very poor name for them as reputation systems, because Web2 reputation systems fundamentally suck, because like the intern can make a 5-star review and everyone now has 5-star reviews. But Web3 reputation systems, together with a market, can become efficient. Does that make sense?
They do, until you have an evil actor. And so I'll give you an example. So I spent, I don't know, a decade of my life fighting Microsoft at the heyday of its consolidation, including antitrust, 1996, 1997, all this kind of stuff. And Microsoft's tactics at the time, they don't do this anymore, included not allowing competitor access to the platforms, various pricing strategies, all of which were subject to antitrust rules, and all of which has been discussed at length by my generation. So the internet comes along, and Cisco, for a while, had more than 50% of control over the net. But Cisco didn't use the same business tactics as Microsoft. And I kept wondering why. Now, partly it's because it's different people, different leadership, but also because it was a protocol network incentive as opposed to an app control incentive, if you see the distinction. So to the degree that your observation is about network scale and protocol, it won't end up being dominated or taken over by a proprietary player. In other words, your vision is correct. To the degree that somebody can come in with significant money, significant network power, and change the protocol to exclude competitors, right? Then you'll have trouble. And again, you have a model of Web3 as protocol network-based, and obviously I like that a lot. I would be very careful in the design of those future layer 2 or whatever is called layer 3 protocols to make sure that they fully affect and realize the vision you outlined.
Yeah, makes sense. That's definitely a challenge, but I think we can formalize that, and it's all going to happen pretty openly, and so that I think that can create those, bring us back to those positive market dynamics.
Yeah, it's interesting in your world, in the people that I talk with, I'll use my kind of language, which I must seem old to them. And my kind of language is, you know, gaining market share, dominance, and so forth. And they say, well, that's not appropriate. So that's a different generation of leaders and a different set of language. So the question is, when it's not appropriate, but it's in someone's financial incentive to do it, will they change their mind? And I don't think we know yet.
I think it's appropriate. We are the standard for oracles, and we dominate that market because we make the best system. I'm totally comfortable with that. You guys good with that? I'm good with it.
But you've done it in such a way that you haven't excluded your competitors. You haven't killed anybody.
No, I haven't killed anybody. I'm not that crazy yet. I haven't got there yet. But if we'll see. Talk to me in a few years. If it keeps going at this pace, who knows? I'm just kidding.
I think it's basically because you run the whole company on Zoom, and Zoom will kill you. Maybe you should have some in-person meetings.
I'll think about it.
We've had this conversation privately before.
I'll definitely think about it. We're not planning to kill anybody, just so we're on the same page. That's not the plan. Great. So this all adds up. In terms of, you know, infrastructure and how it needs to evolve, how do you see oracles fitting into that infrastructure? How do you see infrastructure in Web3 kind of evolving generally? Are there any lessons from Web2 that really explain how, at kind of the infrastructure level, not at the app layer, not at the interface layer, but, and I know we kind of already discussed this, but.
At the end of the day, the companies that won in Web 2 were better technology, they put more capital to work, and they moved faster, and they scaled faster. And these are network businesses, so once you get a little bit ahead, it's very hard to catch up to the person ahead of you. And now in your case, because you were early and very smart, obviously, you got in there first. So you see it from the standpoint of the person who's ahead. So I think that in Web3, you're going to see the same dynamic, right, of new things entering. And the winners, and I think this is absolutely true of Chainlink, they have better technology, as you said, and it scales better. I'm now speaking as a computer scientist. You've got to get the architecture right so you can go from 10 users to 10 million users. And most of the systems that you all collectively, and this is not a comment about Chainlink, it's about others, seem to fall over reasonably quickly, right? That's my observation. They're just not built to scale yet. And it's just harder. You can't do it in 6 months. It takes real computer science, real planning, real platforms. I think Chainlink, because of the way you're going to provide compute services, and I'll just use the generic word trust services, will become a key component of that. But you'll only be one. There'll be a number of other players who will be important as well. I mean, an obvious one is storage services, et cetera.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think in every part of the stack, there will be a network effects efficient winner that as it gets more usage, gets more economic demand in its economic system, if it drives that economic demand into an efficient market, it'll just create, both the most cost efficient and the most scalable. And ideally, if the protocol is built with real computer science, as you put it, which is how we try to do it, then it'll be built in a way that can meet all of those requirements and provide cost and scalability.
So I want to use an example of, remember I said earlier, I'm interested in the things that you can do that you couldn't do in Web 2. So one person I know is working on a model where you find people by creating a token, and the token is both an incentive to find people, but also a disincentive to find them if they don't want to be found, right? And they figured out a way to do this. Now that's something that's very difficult to do in Web 2, right? So if you go back to what I said earlier, that the invention that you guys did, which is layer 2 plus tokens plus distributed plus immutable plus the trust is built into the protocol, there's a bunch of stuff that you can do that would be very hard to do on Web 2. And if I were smarter, I'd make the list. I can't quite make the list yet, but collectively you guys can. And what I would do is then found those companies, because those things are going to be really powerful, right? Because they solve a problem in a completely new way.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I think there's actually these two layers of incentives, as you put it. What you mentioned is kind of a app level incentive or a user level incentive, and then there's infrastructure level incentives.
And I think one of the things for you all to think about is, I have a simple rule, which is if you give me 100 million users, I can make money from them. Trust me, right? If they're doing something, I can find a way to monetize it using, again, traditional Web 2 techniques. What is the same answer on top of Web 3? Because in your vision, Web 3 will be universal across the globe. It'll be used in some form by almost everyone. So one way to, when we initially were doing Google, our goal was we want a little piece of Google in everyone's computation, right? So for example, the DNS that you use is almost certainly the Google DNS, right? Google, roughly a third of the world's internet traffic goes through, I think that's still the number, through Google Fiber. You would never know that. Now, are these gifts to the world? Yes, thank you very much. But they were also in our direct financial interest because it meant that we knew what was going on.
Yeah, having a piece of computation of every computation is a good idea. I'm on board.
Yeah.
I'm on board with that plan. It's a solid plan.
Yes. Is there any particular reason why you can't just announce that that's your plan right now to your customers? We want everyone here to have a piece of Chainlink in everything that you do.
That's the plan. As long as we provide the security you need and the systems that you need, we should win on that basis. And if we provide the most secure, best system for you to build your application, then we should absolutely have the ability to provide that compute to Web3. I think that's exactly right. That's the standard we'll need to meet, and that's the standard Google met very, very impressively. And that's just kind of, at certain size and speed, the name of the game. So I think that's, once again, thank you for getting to the core of the issue, for telling everybody my plan.
Oh, I'm sorry, was that private?
No, it wasn't really. I was just talking about it for like an hour. No. Cool, so I think this makes a lot of sense. Is there anything in particular that attracted you to working with us, working on oracles, that you see oracles playing a particularly important role in infrastructure? Separate from the other systems?
When we first were chatting, you were talking about Oracle, and I thought you were talking about a company. So I'm interested in creating a different Oracle.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Well, that's definitely what we're doing. That's definitely what we're doing, very much so. Okay, great. So I think a lot of this adds up. The final questions that I have are kind of just around how should people be thinking about joining the Web3 industry. There's been a lot of ups and downs in Web3. It's obviously a very cyclical market. People might be wondering, should they build applications in Web3? Should they take their career into Web3? Obviously, it's very cyclical. The cycles are also very rapid. They're about 2 to 3 times as rapid as Web 2 or traditional cycles. How do you think people should view?
Well, let me ask the audience, are we going to have a recession in the next 12 months in the US? The guys over here are in favor of it. Okay, over here you're in favor of it too. Do you know why a recession would be good for all of us? It would get labor prices down, right? So, and I'm not endorsing recessions, trust me. I would answer the question by saying, first, I think we make our own weather in our industry. We make our own economics. And the way you win is you build a product that solves a real problem, and you do it now, and it takes off. So if you're in a downturn, it's the same message as if you're going well, right? A downturn is easier to hire because people become more labor available, and their demands for compensation and so forth become more realistic. But it's the same rule, right? You're trying to build a product that's a breakout product, right? And I have historically ignored, as a matter of business, what was going on in the public markets. The tech industry has always had lots of capital because of software. There's infinite amounts of money to invest. The valuations that are being raised in this cycle are still high relative to normal metrics. If you look at AI, which again I've spent most of my time on, The next generation of startups are being raised at $200 million, billion kind of valuations with 10 people and no product. It's just insane stuff. Thank God the capital markets can provide that kind of capital for this generation of founders. So I'm not at all worried for us. I'm worried about the globe, I'm worried about the war, I'm worried about food, I'm worried about gas prices, I'm worried about all of that. But for our world, which remember is not normal, we're not normal. We have our own little ecosystem. Sorry, Sergey.
No, we're definitely not normal, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, and you and I especially.
Thank you.
We have our we have our own structure. So my advice would be, when I was, it'd be hard for you all to understand. When I was in college, there was an article that said we have too many engineers in our country, and we won't ever need any more. And I, of course, was majoring in electrical engineering because computer science didn't exist. And I remember thinking, well, that's a bummer. But I didn't change what I was doing. And of course, the article, as usual, was completely wrong. But my point here is, as a matter of your life's choice, right? Because life is short and it's over fairly quickly. Figure out what you really want to work on and do something which is exceptional. If you're doing something which is exceptional with a team that you love, what are you complaining about, right? That's the best of life. So.
Eric, I want to thank you for your inspirational ideas. It's been truly a pleasure speaking with you. It's always my immense pleasure to speak with you whenever I have a chance. I'm going to be contacting you ceaselessly to speak with you even more. And
let's just say congratulations to you all for ending up in the right spot in the Web3 space, working with Chainlink. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric.